Is going on, guys? It's Yoji. In this video I will have a in-depth look on all the revealed, reworked and new skills coming in Path of Exile Heist 3.12, and I will give you my professional opinion on how good I think they will be, how good they look, and what the mechanics of them are from what we know so far. And I know what you're thinking, but Yoji, how would you know? We don't have patch notes, we don't have gem reveals, like any numbers, we don't have anything. How will you do that? Well, unlike you, I see PoE as Neo sees the Matrix. I see all the numbers just from looking at the footage, and I will give you a perfectly correct opinion on how everything will pan out right now without patch notes, without information, without anything. So subscribe to this channel for the professionalism in the pronunciation of words. Let's start with the skill you all came here for, Crackling Lance. Man, this skill just looks omega nice. I love the visuals of like the zigzagging lightning like stuff that's happening. It kind of looks like an arc, but it doesn't auto aim. It's just an AoE coverage, but the visuals are so nice. And the skill has built-in intensity. There's like an Intensify support kind of built in there, but you can also use the Intensify support on top of that. And what that does is the more you cast the skill without moving around, the AoE will kind of narrow down, and what it does for this skill is the zigzaggies will get like straighter and straighter and become like a straight line and become a laser beam, dealing more area damage as well as just like narrowing down as well. And what I personally very much love about this, I always hated gem swapping. Like when you have like ink AoE and you swap it for conk effect, or when you take out GMP for like slower projectiles, whatever, whenever a build requires you to do that, I just won't play it. I hate that stuff. So with this type of skill, and also the new pinpoint support, which is basically GMP that reduces projectiles and increases damage if you stand still and repeatedly cast, which I think is a really cool mechanic to kind of give you risk for reward. So you stand still and cast a lot without moving too much, and you get more damage without gem swapping, which I think is insane. So yeah, I think this is a really cool mechanic. I think the skill will be a lot of fun. But with the intensity mechanic, you definitely want to self-cast this one, I feel. Because the intensity stuff doesn't really work without self-casting. And if GGG is calling this hand casting, don't listen to them. It's called self-casting, not hand casting. Hand casting is just the wrong word. GGG fix your shit. Alright, oh, and yeah, with the Intensify stuff, you will, of course, want to invest into a lot of cast speed, so you can get your intensity stacks built up quickly, so you don't have to wait while fighting a boss, or if a rare mob comes along, you don't want to wait and, like, cast, and build up your intensity. You want to go like laser beam, like very fast. And that's why I think a lot of people, when they see a lightning skill these days, they're like, haha, I'm gonna Archmage this. So first of all, we will have to wait for the damage effectiveness to see if Archmage is actually worth. And the other part is, you want to have really high cast speed for intensity stacks, as I mentioned. So you will have to have a lot of mana regen and a lot of mana recovery to make Archmage work on a spell build like this. Just so you know that I mentioned it, but other than that, I think the skill looks fantastic. It could be a lot of fun, and I think a lot of people are very excited for this. This Yoji here included. Alright, next up, the other skill you all came here for, Void Sphere. So Void Sphere is a pretty interesting skill, and these kind of like black hole skills, which this is, they can't call it whatever they want, it's a black hole. And it sucks in enemies, not bosses, just normal mobs, and it destroys corpses. And I think this, no matter like how the skill pans out, otherwise corpse removal in PoE is always like such a good mechanic and such a useful thing. So maybe for that alone it could be worth using. But it does have a cooldown, so for clearing it's kind of on the fence. Maybe we will get like something like a helmet enchant that can make this work. Maybe a threshold rule, but I think that would have been mentioned. Or you just have to get a lot of cooldown reduction. So perhaps we can make this skill work, but we don't really know yet if it can be made work for AoE clearing. You can only have one Void Sphere up at a time, which also puts like a damper on the clear speed. This can probably have, so you can't just like leave them behind and keep running and spam another one, keep running and let it kill mobs, because the second to last one will already disappear if you put another one in there. So you kind of have to kind of like pick and choose where you place them. And also the succ doesn't work on bosses, so you can't crowd control bosses with this, so it remains to be seen how good this will be on bosses. But it does sound nice. The visuals are fantastic. Like, it's so crisp, it's so good looking. With the suck in of the corpses, it looks so amazing. I just really hope this will be good, and I think it can be decent, at least as a supportive skill, which I think is what GGG are aiming for here. They want this to be like a secondary ability and not a main ability. But maybe we can still make it work. We'll see. But this one is a bit of a tricky one. The next skill to look at is definitely a supportive one. It's called Frost Shield, and it's a shield, and a shield area that defends you from enemies outside the shield while slowing enemies nearby and in the shield. And it drains some of your ES to build up its own HP pool, with which it then protects you. And also, while you're inside, it gives you some base crit chance. So you kind of want to stay inside, keep enemies at bay outside. If they get in, they get chilled, so you can still get away from them. And I think this is a really, really fantastic skill. Base crit is nice for any basically already non-crit cap build. So maybe for like a crit cap Assassin Ice Spear, this is not the one to use. But if you're like a Hierophant, crit, Ice Nova, and Frostbolt build, this could allow you to get your crit cap that you might not have yet because you invested in a lot of other things, right? So for non-assassins, this could be really, really good. The shield does have a life pool, so I wonder if there's a visual indicator here that allows you to see when it will go down, which I think would help a lot to make this more reliable and to allow you to really like play around the skill a bit more. And also with enemies outside of it being affected by the damage reduction a lot more, I think it makes sense to not maybe max the AoE on this, so you don't want this to be like full screen, because then any enemy on the screen will be inside and not really, you won't really benefit from the damage reduction as much. But at the same time, if you just want to chill everything because you're like hypothermia support or something like this, you can just like AoE scale it up as much as you can. So yeah, I think this is a pretty cool one where you kind of want to balance your AoE for maximum effectiveness. And I think all these skills, despite how GG show them in the background footage here, I think you kind of want to use them in a way that you don't spam them on every single pack. Maybe only if you encounter like a Betrayal Mob that's a bit more tanky, or like a tanky rare, or of course map bosses and definitely Conquerors. I think this is more of a boss fight single target ability that you use for support there, and less of an ability that you use in just like an everyday white trash mob clear situation. So this is more for like pinch situations. Right, the next one kind of goes into the same vein where you want to use it mostly on bosses. It's called Sigil of Power. But this one, you want to scale the AoE as much as possible, because while you are inside this zone, you increase your mana cost by quite a little bit. Archmages, by the way, really want this. And by that you charge up the rune, gaining more and more stages of added lightning damage, up to a maximum, at which point enemies inside also do less damage to you. So at this point, it's basically, you really want to max the AoE of that thing. You really want to max out your mana cost with this. So this is like an Archmage's wet dream. I think it could also be good for non-Archmages, because it gives added flat lightning damage. And Archmage already gives so much added flat that the added flat from this, damage-wise, maybe not even that great compared to the Archmage. Maybe the numbers are off the charts, then of course it is. But if it's not, the damage boost might actually be more significant to non-Archmage build, while of course the mana cost increase that this thing already gives definitely will increase Archmage's damage by itself, no matter how big the flat added damage will turn out to be. And less damage taken, always great. Also the visuals are super nice, with like the runes filling in as you cast spells, and then once it's like fully charged, it kind of like sets on fire a little bit, like starts to glow a bit more. Amazing artwork, amazing. Flame Wall is up next, and that's one that we've already seen in the trailer before. This one casts a Flame Wall that deals damage over time to enemies that walk into it. Maybe it can be used as a main skill. It has 3 Flame Walls max. We don't know if the damage over time stacks of them, if you like overlap them. We don't know that yet. We'll have to try it out. So yeah, it's not sure if it will be viable for a main skill, but I think it has potential probably, if the numbers are high enough. And if the numbers are high, scaling the dot is actually really good for the supportive use as well, because part of the dot is inherited to all projectiles that go through it. So if you shoot a fireball through this flame wall, the fireball will inherit part of the dot as well as added fire damage by flying through, which it then applies to the enemy it hits. So you get a dot from it, and you also get flat added damage to it, which makes any fire projectile that has high base damage effectiveness really, really good with this one. And on top of that, I think it's great for any fire projectile. It's really great for any dot scaling build. So if you're like an Ignite Fireballer, which is something I'm eyeballing for my league start, by the way, this could be amazing. And talking about fire projectiles, Blazing Salvo looks fantastic as well. The visuals are really cool, especially in the footage shown where you have like a spammy playstyle, just like barraging enemies with fireball type things that are not fireballs because that's a different spell. They're like blazing orbs of fire rich, I don't know how to call this. It looks really nice. And what it does is, like, the further you cast it away, the more they spread out, and the closer you cast them to yourself, they the projectiles are kind of bunched together more. And what is great with that is that they can AoE overlap. So multiple projectiles AoEs can hit the same target, which I think makes this fantastic. And that's kind of like gives you a bit of a, how do you say that? Risk versus reward, and also like a skill-based playstyle. So you want to position closer to the enemy to deal more damage, and are rewarded with more overlap. But at the same time, you also, if you aim well on the edges of the screen and react well to enemies spawning, you can cover large AoE as well. So I think this is a really, really cool skill. Unlike like most things we've seen so far in PoE with like targeting, where targeting really matters and your playstyle really matters. And what I think GGG are trying to promote here is a playstyle where you actually want to self-cast this, not hand-cast, wrong word still, instead of putting it on a mine or a totem or whatever. So you actually get maximum use out of this, because you are usually, hopefully you, I really hope you are, smarter than totems, which is a piece of wood. You should be smarter than a piece of wood. Please tell me you're smarter than a piece of wood. Leave a comment below if you're not smarter than a piece of wood. Or a mine, which is kind of like a contraption or whatever. You should be smarter than those. Aim those better. If you can get more out of this spell, which I think is a fantastic way to scale this. Also, a cool thing to note, fork splits these orbs as they hit. So if they hit the ground and they fork, they like kind of like split again and detonate again. I wonder if that will actually work with a single target and improve that, but definitely should improve the clear. So fork is definitely a cool option to have here. Always nice to have some more options for fork to be applied, because usually chain and pierce are more consistent and therefore used more often. And another thing that makes for these high single target situation that we can think of, it should scale with added projectiles, because the more projectiles you have, the more the more overlap you can generate, the more damage you can do, and also the more AoE those projectiles have, the more overlap you will generate. So we have several damage multiplier scalings for this spell potentially, which can make this really, really good. Next up, we will have a look at steal skills. And for steal skills, there are several ones, and overall I have to say, the visuals, especially for all of them, are not too exciting to me personally. After looking at these spells and stuff we looked at before, and also some of the stuff we will look at later, these look very bare bones, like just visually. It's just like very tiny projectiles, very thin lines drawn shooting around, and it doesn't look as fancy, explodey and whatnot. So yeah, let's have a look at these skills. And the first one I looked at was Lancing Steel, which is completely reworked. It kind of gives me some Winter Orbish vibes. It seems to be scalable with additional projectiles. What it does, it creates kind of like a turret type thing next to you that shoots at enemies, and it maybe it's a bit more of a supportive skill, and it seems to be working with the ammo system that the seal skills now have, where as you impale enemies, you get a skill that's called Call of Steel that you automatically have available when you use any steel skill or have any steel skill on your bar. Kind of like Detonate Mines appears once you like start placing mines, right? And how that works is you can kind of detonate the impale stacks on enemies, applying all the stored up impale damage, so the impale stacks at once on an enemy, ripping out like these blade shards from them, and those are then used as ammunition for the steel skills. And Lancing Steel needs ammunition to fuel these turrets that will then shoot shards at enemies. I think one use is like costs like 4 shards and then will shoot for a while at enemies. It prioritizes enemies that you've not shot yet, or the turret has not shot yet. So it seems to be better for clear, or like tries to clear more than focus down single targets. So you kind of like have this turret that clears around like stragglers and whatnot, and you kind of like zone in or home in on the rares. Maybe this is more of a supportive skill. Maybe this is used as a main skill. We don't know yet. We'll find out once it's out, but I'm kind of a bit iffy on these ones. Also, how much ammunition will be used. They said for Lancing Steel that the ammunition use is potentially very high and that you kind of like want to invest more into Impale. I guess if you want to use these skills, you want to be at 100 Impale chance no matter what. So I don't really see you doing like elemental Lancing Steel at all. And GGG doesn't either. Alright, next, Shattering Steel. It looks very basic and boring, just from like the visuals, kind of like just projectiles shooting out. It seems to have a built-in point-blank mechanic, so when you hit an enemy with the skill, and you have ammunition, then you get added block chance, which is potentially good for survival, maybe in hardcore. And also there are like explosions happening, the shattering of the Shattering Steel part, where when you hit an enemy, projectile explodes, kind of can overlap a bit, it says. So maybe there's some high damage potential there, but it looks really, really, I don't know, it's really hard to tell from the footage, even as a Neo who can see through Path of Exile's visuals and see the mechanics. It's really hard to see even for me, so you probably don't even know what this does. But yeah, the block chance buff, potentially nice. Built-in point blank, it does have, so when you get closer, so it's kind of like a projectile skill that wants you to get closer to deal more damage, which makes kind of sense because you're using a melee weapon, but we'll see how that goes. Now for the other one is Splitting Steel. That one looks to have really decent clear and potentially with like chain maybe added to it. I can see this maybe on Deadeye. Could potentially have really good clear, and it's really funny because this one is intended as the early leveling skill, and the other one, the Shattering Steel one, is not the early one. So this one has a lot of added physical damage. So Splitting Steel, yeah, you should be able to use this for leveling if the flat damage is high enough, even if you don't have a great weapon at the start. But also with like the splitting, the clear seems really cool, and how they now define splitting as like one of these projectile mechanics we have. So if you remember, chaining, forking, and piercing have a hierarchy, right? So currently it is in PoE, it's like first if you have pierce, fork, and chain, you first always pierce until all the pierces are used up, then you fork until all the forks used up, and then you chain until all the chains are used up, right? And split now takes priority before that. So you shoot a projectile, and until it can't split anymore, it won't chain or fork or whatever. So you shoot your projectile, it hits an enemy, it splits, and then these can chain. So I think potentially Splitting Steel does have great clear speed, but we will see how it works with like all the ammunition system. And that concept as a whole, in my opinion, makes the steel skills a bit hard to judge whether they will be a good league starter, and definitely something you should stay away from if you want a risk-free league start, in my opinion. Now we're going back to spells, and this one I'm particularly excited for. Firestorm got reworked, and we now got meteors, baby! Oh yes, big, fat, chunky meteors striking down on the enemies. Visually looks fantastic, and I think it should be a lot more fun, at least to me. This looks a lot more fun than the old Firestorm. There's still some like fire raining down after the meteor, so you cast down like one fat meteor, and then it's like the old Firestormy stuff still happening. Just not as impactful and as important as the big fat... Did I mention there's a big fat juicy meteor slamming down on an enemy? Like, boosh! Like, it's going to be good. So yeah, and the Firestorms after that trickle down have a limit now on how many you can stack of these. So before, Firestorm used to be about casting really fast, stacking up a lots of duration, and then trying to get these firestorms raining down on the enemy as fast as possible, triggering like some on-hit mechanics or whatnot to make this just like really, really damaging with like lots and lots of hits. Now it's more about the big, fat, chunky boosh, and it seems to have really good AoE from the footage we've seen, and like one fat stack of AoE coverage makes this more reliable, because before Firestorm would have these like trickling fire blasts coming down, these mini meteors, and that always made it very unreliable. Like you could hit a pack and like while it's running at you, and you just not kill anything or like everything. You kill like some mobs, but some mobs will get through. And this meteor should make it more reliable, but at the same time, there seems to be a bit of a delay on it. So this big chunky one hit coming down seems to have a bit of a delay, because it has gonna come from the space and like get to the ground. It makes sense, like lore wise, that just like doesn't just like instantly appear. But yeah, this could make it a bit difficult to aim, maybe take some time to get used to, maybe take some skill, skill in PoE, it's crazy, right? To use and make the most out of it, especially against like fast-moving enemies, bosses, stuff that flickers around, whatever, stuff like that. But also huge big hits, potentially, always are good for Ignite, and I love myself some Ignite builds, so I will definitely keep a close eye on this one. But yeah, bear in mind, this could be a bit clunky. Try it out maybe while leveling, try it out maybe a little bit later with more cast speed, but don't bank on this being a fantastic feeling clear skill. It will look amazing. That's 100%. So if you just want to look like a boss, bombing stuff with meteors, you're good. If you want to like clear smoothly, maybe have a backup plan. Next up, we have the rework that had me the most surprised. The Glacial Cascade has actually been a pretty stable skill still on mines. It has been used quite a lot, I think, which is why GGG are showcasing this footage on a miner, which I think is a bit of an interesting choice. Glacial Cascade used to do physical damage, but 60% of which was converted to cold damage, and there were threshold rules to convert even more pretty easily. So it kind of makes sense to now just have the 100% conversion on the gem, which does hamper creativity a tiny bit, because you can't really do like any further or different conversions. For example, Fist to Lightning doesn't really work on this as well, but you still get to play with it in a more easy fashion, and it's way easier to build around. It's way more clear how it is intended to be used. So it kind of makes sense. It still has the cascading AoEs that can overlap, but now the early stages have a knockback, and the last explosion is way larger than AoE. Kind of like meant to be like the fat damage blast in the end. Seems to me a bit like a spell version of the new Thunder, if you played that. I played Thunder last league, and what it does is like a slow cascading hits, and the last one is like a big boosh that has lots of AoE. So the AoE increases as it travels. I think the knockback is a really interesting thing, and also how you would then scale it. You try to generate as much AoE overlap and as much knockback distance maybe as possible, and then kind of try to generate that overlap position cleverly to kind of maybe push bosses against the wall or not, depending on what improves overlap. And I think, again, they're trying to promote Selfcast here with the logic that you are smarter than a totem, you are smarter than a trap or a mine, so you can maybe position the boss a bit better with the knockback and the overlap. But we'll see if that's actually true. But yeah, definitely makes for a very unique skill, so I'm kind of excited about it. And also the new visuals look way better than the old ones, but I never really liked the old ones. I felt, especially like the very old one, this is already, the version we currently have is already an updated version. The old one looked like really horrible, and that right now also looks kind of iffy, and the new one, in my opinion, does look a bit better. Also, less visual clutter, it's a bit more see-through, you can kind of see the enemies through it a bit better, and maybe barriers and stuff that might kill you. So I think definitely a good change. And next up we got a rework a lot of people have been waiting for, and I'm very sad that GGG did not provide any video footage of this skill in action. That is Discharge. Discharge has been a staple for a long time and has a very, very cult following of people who loved the skill back before it was nerfed. The famous cast on crit Discharge, the Mjolnir Discharge builds were famous, and they were notorious, and they were really, really strong, super nice endgame specs. A lot of people loved playing. And now Discharge is getting a rework, but I think it might make some of these people quite sad, because it seems to be aimed towards a completely different playstyle for the most part. AoE scaling has been made so that it scales with more charges, so the more charges you have, the bigger the AoE gets, which I think could have huge potential if you build around that. And the damage apparently has been tripled, which I think should be huge, right? However, there's a cooldown now, which I think is a big bummer. And yeah, maybe it's intended for slower self-cast. Maybe kind of like a spell slam ability where you kind of you want to charge up your charges, similar like slams want to war cry and then slam a big slam. You want to build up charges and then boosh, have a huge discharge happening. So maybe it's kind of intended like that, not the fast triggering cycloning playstyle we had before. Sadly, when I think about big boosh spells, I normally think about Ignite. However, it apparently also has penalties to Ignite because it would be OP with Ignite. I don't always like these, like when I rework a skill and then I initially already like pre-plan for a nerf of a certain archetype with it. I mean, if it's actually too strong, then okay, but for Ignite builds to become like meta-breakingly powerful, I still think we have quite a bit of room until we reach that point, let's say that. And there's also a threshold rule lowering the cooldown significantly, while also lowering the damage and lowering the AoE apparently. So this one maybe you could use if it lowers the cooldown enough, you could use that with, like, let's say a Mjolnir, a Cosprey's cast on crit setup. If the cooldown gets lowered to like I think it's 0.15 seconds. If it gets as low, that could work. Yeah, I think it still could be Ignite viable if they actually triple the damage. I don't know how much the penalty is, but I think this still could be Ignite viable. But then AoE spell Ignites never feel as good as projectile Ignites, to me at least. So I'm kind of a bit iffy on this one. My hopes are not too high. I'll have a close look at this, like the gem info, and I will have a very close look at what other people do with it, because I think this spell might, like with all these mechanics that kind of pre-nerf it a bit. I think a lot of people will be like, I'm taking my distance from this one, see how it goes. I'm going to be the same, but if I see this is going to be good, I'll jump on the train. But yeah, for now, a bit iffy. And sadly, no footage at all, so it's really hard to judge. Like, my Neo vision doesn't work if I don't have anything to look at. And for the last section, we have the big curse rework, hexes and marks. Now curses are split into hexes and marks, and hexes are AoE curses and marks are single target curses. So Warlord's Mark, Assassin's Mark and Poacher's Mark are now single target curses, so they can't be used for AoE charge generation with curse on hit rings anymore at all whatsoever, because you can only ever curse one enemy with a mark. There will also be a fourth mark added, which is Sniper's Mark, which we don't have absolutely any information yet, but it is the reworked projectile weakness, and I think it makes a lot of sense because projectile weakness was always the odd one out, the one curse you kind of didn't feel like using. And on paper it seemed kind of cool, but it never really saw any use. I mean, there was also another one called Punishment, but that one is getting reworked as well. We will talk about that in a bit. But yeah, as I said, Sniper's Mark will be added to that, probably kind of like a bow projectile single target curse. And which I think is really, really good is that curse resistance on bosses is taken away from marks, not hexes. Hexes still get them, so the bosses are not very hexable, but they're very markable. And I think that makes so much sense because before, like, you don't really need to debuff any white enemies. For most part, you don't even need to curse or debuff rares as much. But bosses, that's kind of the big fat enemies that are so strong, you definitely want to debuff their stats. But those are the enemies that are curse resistant. That never personally made sense to me at all whatsoever. So now the marks are specific single target curses which are made for that purpose, and they ignore the curse resistance, and they will also get passive nodes that you can use to buff and increase the effect. So marks might actually be a viable single target solution to solve your single target damage, let's say on a bow build for example, because all marks will be dex based and the mark nodes will be mostly around the ranger area of the tree, so kind of like right side-ish, probably going up a bit into shadow, maybe going down a bit into duelist, but around that area. Now, on the other hand, we have the hexes. Hexes are AoE curses. Those are your elemental weaknesses, frostbites, despairs, and all these types of curses. And they will now get Doom over time. What Doom does is you apply the curse to a pack, and then it will stack up Doom, which stacks up effectiveness of the curses. So having the curses on enemies longer will increase their effect, which kind of makes a lot of sense, because if you like curse a white mob pack, you'll probably like wipe them out with a hit anyways. But if you have like a tough rare and you put the Doom on and you keep hitting it and it doesn't die, so the Doom will then stack up and you will do more and more damage as the longer it lives and the longer it is cursed, which I think is really, really cool and does, as I said, make a lot of sense as a mechanic overall. And yeah, with the Doom mechanic, we also get some mechanics that intertwine with that, or at least one of them. And that one is Impending Doom, which is a support that triggers a Doom Blast, which is a kind of AoE chaos explosion, when a curse is removed from an enemy. So either the duration expires, you replace it with a different curse, the enemy maybe becomes curse immune, you kill the enemy, that also works because then there's no curse enemy, it explodes. So you basically, with that support, can use your curses to clear stuff. Kind of like Bane, but without the damage over time, but with a chaos explosion, which I think is kind of cool. But in the footage, it looked a bit clunky, and I think one of the reasons is Doom Blast scales with the Doom on the enemy. So if you put a curse on the enemy, and the longer it's on there, the more damage your Doom Blast will do, which makes it kind of weird because you want to wait before you nuke the pack to do enough damage to nuke them all, but you also don't want to wait because waiting in PoE while clearing is bad. And the footage didn't look as impressive when it comes to clearing. However, it's GGG footage. Sometimes it just doesn't look impressive while clearing, and the skill still turns out to be good, so we'll have to see. I think the mechanic though, overall, is really, really cool. And talking about really, really cool, there's a new chaos spell now called Hex Blast. It is a chaos hit spell, which we don't have that many of. I think there's only Dark Pact, and it can cause all elemental ailments as well. How this skill is supposed to work is that it has synergy with all these hexes that you can have. Because most of the hexes like flammability, frostbite, conductivity, they lower the resistance on the enemies. And Hex Blast uses the lowest of all enemy elemental and chaos resistances, so of all resistances, and deals the damage against that one. So it's mitigated by the worst resistance. So if the enemy has insane chaos res, for example, but low fire res because you just put flammability and alley weak on the enemy, then it will work against the fire res of the enemy, which I think is super cool mechanic to have. And on top of that, flammability, frostbite, and conductivity all give a chance to apply the ailment to the enemy. So Hexblast being able to apply all elemental ailments is a fantastic synergy for that. So I think overall that spell is really, really cool. And the visuals are super nice. The animation looks really fast in the video footage we have. So it could make for like a really snappy and fast playstyle. It is an AoE ground targeted ability, it seems, which always are a bit on the slower side when it comes to clearing. But I think this one is definitely pretty good. And the animation looks really nice. The AoE could be a bit small, but yeah, as I said, the animation looks nice, the visuals are cool, and I think this could be a very fun playstyle to use. And lastly, we have the reworked Punishment Hex. This basically gives you a cheap way to have an exploding mechanic on your build, which I think is good because exploding mechanics have become so mandatory. You either at this point get rid of most, if not all of them, or you have to make them more available. And they did that last patch with Infernal Cry, and they're doing it now again with Punishment. So maybe it could be an option to put Punishment early on Blasphemy, use it on a Cyclone build to explode stuff. How the explosions work is if you kill an enemy, the overkill damage, so let's say an enemy has 100 life and you do 1k damage to the enemy with 100 life, then 900 of that damage is dealt as explosion damage, which is the overkill damage to surrounding enemies. And if these are cursed as well, this should be able to chain, but the chaining is of course very limited because you need to do overkill damage every single time. So there's not going to be too much chaining happening, plus all the enemies it chains to would have to be cursed. So for example, they would all have to be standing inside the area of your blasphemy, just as an example. Or if you self-cast, you would have to curse them before. If you curse on hitting, you would have to hit them before even. So yeah, I think it's not going to be insane for clear speed, but it might help. And also corpse removal, exploding corpses against porcupines, for example, is a very fantastic thing to have in PoE overall. Now, the debuff punishment applies to enemies is twofold. First of all, when they hit you, they will be debilitated, which means they deal less damage and they are slower moving, which I guess is kind of alright, but you don't want to rely on enemies hitting you. But if something is hitting you, if it's hitting you again, dealing less damage, kind of makes sense. And there's definitely worse things to have. And a bit better and more synergistic part is low life enemies take more damage if they are cursed by punishment, which of course synergizes very well with the overkill damage explosion part of the skill. So I'm not sure if it's really worth it. Maybe it can be used as a stopgap while early mapping, and maybe it can be used for to get like a cheap entrance exploding mechanic to boost your clear a little bit, but then you would have to forgo an aura if you want to use it on blasphemy. It's a bit of a tricky one. I don't really know if this will see too much use in this state, maybe more than in the current state, because the current state skill is not all that great. So yeah, I'm a bit on the fence for this one, but might be worth trying out if you're a very melee build. So for example, if let's say you're playing a double striker, or as I said, a cyclone, and you don't have crazy AoE yet, maybe chuck on a blasphemy and try it out, see if it works. And if it doesn't, you can always go back to the aura you were using before, which is probably Flesh and Stone. And with all that, thank you very much for watching this video. Subscribe if you're new to this channel. Consider supporting me on Patreon like these awesome people were doing already. And yeah, see you in Heist. I'm Yoji, and I will see you in Heist. I already said that. They get depilated,